Dadperfectrevenge. I walked into my own house and found every piece of my engineering equipment dumped in the garage, like it was heading for the scrapyard. My daughter-in-law Patricia stood there with that satisfied smile she gets when she thinks she's finally won something big. "You don't need all this old junk cluttering up the house anymore, Rick," she said, arms crossed like she was doing me some kind of favor. "I converted your office into my business space. The garage is perfect for someone who's supposed to be retired anyway." For a moment, everything went quiet. Not because I was shocked. I'd been watching this woman operate for 3 years now. The quiet came because I realized she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. I'm Richard Anderson, 61 years old, and I spent 35 years as an electrical engineer before retiring. I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me when my wife Barbara passed 3 years ago. Turns out I was wrong about that too. The whole thing started on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd driven to Barbara's grave like I do every week, bringing fresh daisies for her headstone. She always said daisies were honest flowers, no pretense, just simple beauty. I'd spent longer than usual that day telling her about the circuit design I'd been working on, how I was trying to solve a power distribution problem that had been nagging at me for weeks. Barbara used to listen to me ramble about engineering challenges for hours, never once making me feel like my work was just old man's hobbies. I miss having someone who understands why these things matter. I told her headstone. The wind rustled through the oak trees, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice telling me to quit feeling sorry for myself and get back to what I love doing. After spending an hour telling her about my week, I headed home expecting to work on that new circuit design in my office. The office Barbara had helped me set up when I retired, where she'd insisted I needed proper lighting and a comfortable chair because your eyes aren't 30 anymore, Rick. But when I pulled into the driveway, I knew something was wrong. There were boxes and equipment scattered across the concrete, spilling onto the lawn. My oscilloscope, the one I'd used for the last 20 years of my career, sitting next to a pile of technical manuals that had cost me thousands of dollars over the decades. My patent certificates, the ones that still bring in royalty checks every quarter, minus crumpled in a cardboard box like yesterday's newspapers. I walked slowly toward the house, my mind automatically cataloging the damage. My precision toolbox lay open, instruments scattered like someone had just dumped everything out without any regard for calibration or organization. Then I saw it, my framed photo with Barbara at my retirement party. The glass cracked right down the middle, separating us after 40 years of marriage. That photo had been taken on one of the best days of my life. Barbara wore her blue dress, the one she said brought out her eyes, and she was beaming with pride as my colleagues presented me with a plaque for my contributions to electrical safety standards. "You changed how power grids operate across 3 states. My supervisor had said that day. Buildings are safer because of your work." Now the photo lay broken in a cardboard box, treated like garbage. That's when Patricia appeared on the porch, looking like she'd been waiting for this moment. She had that expression she wears when she's already decided something and expects the world to just accept it. The same look she'd worn when she announced, "I'd be eating dinner alone from now on because family time is for people who contribute to the household." "The house needs space for people who contribute to the future," she said, her voice flat and final. "You can set up whatever you need in the garage. It's actually better for your hobbies anyway. More space to spread out all your projects." The way she said projects made my 35 years of professional engineering sound like a child playing with toys. This woman had no idea that my hobbies had helped design the electrical systems for half the office buildings in our city, that my patents were still generating income that helped pay the mortgage on the house she was now claiming as her territory. Behind her, half hidden in the doorway, stood my son Timothy. He looked pale, staring at the ground with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Here was my 38-year-old son, a software engineer with government security clearance, acting like a kid caught in a lie instead of a man watching his father get thrown out of his own house. I remembered teaching Timothy basic electronics when he was 12, showing him how circuits worked, how electricity followed predictable paths if you understood the principles. He'd been fascinated then, asking questions that showed real understanding. "Dad, how do you know which wire goes where?" he'd asked. "Because electricity always takes the path of least resistance, son. You just have to understand the system." Now my son was taking the path of least resistance too, and it led straight through his father's dignity. I stood there holding that broken photo, and something inside me wanted to shout, to remind them both that I'd helped buy this house, that my name was on the deed right alongside Tim's. That I'd held Timothy in my arms the day he was born and taught him everything I knew about solving problems systematically, but I didn't shout. Instead, I felt something settle over me like putting on an old work jacket. The same calm I used to feel when facing a complex electrical problem that nobody else could figure out. The kind of problem that required patience, systematic analysis, and perfect documentation before you could even think about implementing a solution. I guess some things need proper rewiring, I said quietly, looking straight at Patricia. Her smile faltered just a bit. Maybe she heard something in my voice that made her wonder if she'd calculated wrong. For just a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face, like a voltage drop that tells you there's a fault somewhere in the system. That night, I slept in the garage on a folding cot I found behind my workbench. The concrete was cold, and the smell of motor oil hung in the air. I lay there listening to the house settle, thinking about Barbara and all the systems we'd built together, not just electrical ones, but the life systems that keep a family running. Barbara had been the household engineer in her own way. She understood that relationships, like circuits, needed proper maintenance and care. You can't just assume everything will keep working without attention, she used to say when I'd get too absorbed in my projects. Systems fail when you stop monitoring them. I should have been monitoring this system better. Around midnight, I remembered something important. My document safe, a fireproof box where I kept crucial papers, insurance policies, the house deed, my patents, investment records. I'd moved it to the garage months ago when Patricia complained it was taking up closet space in what used to be my office. I found the safe behind some paint cans. The electronic lock had been tampered with crude scratches around the keypad where someone had tried to force it. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. Several documents were missing: my social security card, copies of my patent registrations, and most importantly, some of my financial statements. I didn't know which ones yet, but I knew with absolute certainty that Patricia's plan was already in motion. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on that cot, staring at the garage ceiling, my engineer's mind working through the problem systematically. How did I end up here? 3 years ago, I had my own home, my workshop, a life that made sense. Now I was sleeping on a folding cot in my own son's garage, surrounded by my belongings, like they were garbage waiting for pickup. The answer had been building slowly for years. I just hadn't wanted to analyze the failure pattern. When Barbara died, our house became unbearable. Every room held her memory. The kitchen where she made coffee every morning at exactly 6:15. The garden where she grew tomatoes that actually tasted like something. The bedroom where I'd reach for her in the night and find only cold sheets. After 6 months of rattling around those empty rooms, Timothy suggested I move in with his family. Patricia thinks it would be good for everyone, he said. You shouldn't be alone, Dad. We've got plenty of space, and Patricia says she'd love the help around the house. Even then, something about the way he phrased it should have set off alarms. Timothy had always been direct with me, engineer to engineer. But this conversation felt rehearsed, like he was delivering someone else's message rather than expressing his own thoughts. I sold the house within 2 months. Looking back, that might have been mistake number 1. I gave up my base of operations, my independence, my last connection to the life Barbara and I had built. But at the time, the silence in that empty house was killing me slowly. At first, everything seemed fine. I fixed their electrical problems, and there were plenty of them. The previous owner had done some seriously questionable wiring that was frankly dangerous. I installed new outlets in the kitchen, upgraded their electrical panel to handle modern loads, even helped Timothy set up his home office network with proper surge protection. I cooked dinner twice a week, recipes Barbara had taught me over 4 decades. Timothy seemed happy to have me around, and Patricia smiled and thanked me for helping out. It's so nice having someone who actually knows what they're doing, she said after I'd rewired their bathroom to bring it up to code. Timothy's useless with anything practical, but the warmth didn't last long. Within 6 months, Patricia's gratitude turned into something else. She started sighing when I entered rooms, rolling her eyes when I told stories about my engineering days. She'd cut me off mid-sentence to change the subject or make little comments that sounded like jokes but hit like small hammers. You don't have to act retired, Rick. You could try staying current with technology. Things have changed since the 1980s. The irony was that my patents were all from the 1990s and 2000s, covering innovations that were still being implemented in modern power systems. But Patricia didn't know that. She saw an old man playing with obsolete equipment, not realizing that my obsolete knowledge was generating steady royalty income that helped pay her mortgage. Gradually, she took control of everything. She decided what we ate for dinner, and my cooking disappeared from the rotation. She managed the household budget, claiming it was too complicated for me to understand modern financial planning. When I asked where my Social Security and pension contributions went, she smiled and said, "Don't worry about boring financial stuff. Everything's being invested properly. You should focus on enjoying retirement." I told myself she was just organized. I made excuses because admitting the alternative meant facing that my daughter-in-law saw me not as family, but as a revenue stream to be managed and controlled. Timothy never said a word. When Patricia criticized me at dinner, he studied his plate like it contained engineering schematics. When she complained about noise from my late-night technical work, he suggested I use headphones. When she announced my office would become her business space, because I could work anywhere, he nodded like it made perfect engineering sense. I kept waiting for him to remember that I was his father, that I'd taught him to think critically and question systems that didn't make logical sense. But my son had learned that silence was safer than troubleshooting family problems. The warning sign I should have recognized came 8 months ago. Patricia approached me with a folder of papers and a pen, explaining these were household authorization forms that would streamline shared expenses. Her voice was patient, like she was helping a confused old man understand something simple. "It's just standard stuff," she said, sliding the documents across the kitchen table. "Power of attorney for household decisions, medical authorization in case of emergency. Everyone does this when family members live together. It makes everything so much easier, but 35 years of reading technical specifications had taught me to study documents carefully. I'd seen too many projects fail because someone signed off on specs without understanding the implications. These weren't household forms. They were comprehensive power of attorney documents that would give someone else control over my bank accounts, my patents, my medical decisions, even my living arrangements. The language was dense, filled with legal terms that would have confused most people my age. But I'd spent decades reading contracts for engineering projects, parsing warranty clauses and liability limitations. I knew predatory language when I saw it. "I need time to review these properly," I told her. "Maybe run them by my attorney." Her smile tightened for just a moment before she recovered. Something flickered behind her eyes, irritation, maybe, or the look you get when a circuit doesn't behave the way your calculations predicted. "Of course, take all the time you need. There's no rush at all." She never brought them up again. But I filed that memory away the same way I'd file away component specifications that might be important for troubleshooting later. Now, lying in that garage with my broken belongings around me, I understood I'd been a fool. The missing documents, the authorization forms, the 3 years of slow marginalization, it was all connected. Patricia had been building a comprehensive system for years. I just hadn't wanted to see the circuit diagram. Around 2 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. Patricia hadn't bothered locking the side door, probably assuming I wouldn't dare enter my own house. I moved quietly through the dark hallway, my engineering training reminding me which floorboards had loose nails that would creak under load. That's when I heard her voice from the kitchen. She was on the phone, speaking in the confident tone she used when she thought nobody was monitoring the system. "The documents are almost ready," she said. "Once he's declared incompetent, everything transfers over automatically. The patents, his accounts, all of it. He won't be able to fight it. Who's going to believe a confused old man over his own family?" I stood frozen in that hallway, her words hitting me like voltage through a faulty ground. She wasn't just pushing me aside, she was planning to erase me completely. Legally, financially, medically, the power of attorney documents weren't for emergencies, they were for permanent control. "The beauty is, he'll sign them himself," she continued. "I just need to wait for the right moment, when he's emotional or confused. Maybe after another one of his cemetery visits, he always comes back all weepy and sentimental." I felt something cold settle in my chest. She'd been watching me, studying my patterns, waiting for moments of vulnerability to exploit. This wasn't impulsive greed. This was systematic predation. I didn't confront Patricia about what I'd overheard. A younger man might have stormed into that kitchen demanding answers. But I'd learned that accusations without proper documentation just give your opposition time to implement better countermeasures. Instead, I went back to the garage and started thinking like an engineer again. Every system has vulnerabilities. Every circuit has weak points. Patricia had been running her scheme for years, but she'd made one critical error. She assumed I was just a helpless old man who'd accept whatever voltage she decided to feed me. She had no idea she was dealing with someone who'd spent decades troubleshooting complex systems, someone who understood that the best solutions required patience, proper analysis, and comprehensive documentation before implementation. Over the next few days, I started gathering data. Real data, not assumptions or emotional reactions. I began documenting everything systematically: times, dates, conversations, financial irregularities. I kept a detailed log, just like the maintenance records I'd maintained on power systems throughout my career. I installed a small recording device in the common areas of the house, perfectly legal since my name was on the deed. The equipment was simple, minus basic digital recorders, the kind students use for lectures, nothing sophisticated, but effective for capturing conversations that Patricia assumed were private. I started checking my credit reports more carefully, tracking my financial accounts with the same attention I'd once paid to power consumption patterns. What I found made my blood run cold, but it also confirmed that my systematic approach was yielding actionable intelligence. Patricia had been busy. There were credit cards I'd never applied for, showing up on my credit report with balances I'd never authorized, loans I'd never signed for, all bearing my social security number and forged versions of my signature. Investment accounts I'd never opened, funded with money that had been systematically diverted from my legitimate accounts. She'd been using my identity like a power source, drawing current whenever she needed it, while making sure I never saw the meter readings. But she'd made a mistake that would cost her everything. In all her careful planning, Patricia had never bothered to check the fundamental specifications of the system she was trying to control. She didn't know who actually owned the house she was using as her base of operations. Timothy had needed my help buying this property 12 years ago. His credit was damaged from some financial mistakes he'd made right out of college. I hadn't just co-signed the mortgage. I'd put up the entire down payment from my retirement savings and ended up as co-owner. 50% of this house belonged to me, legally and permanently. Patricia didn't know that. Timothy had handled all the paperwork when they bought the house, and Patricia had never asked to see the actual deed. She'd assumed the house was entirely theirs, never realizing that the foundation of her entire scheme was built on faulty assumptions. That was her fatal engineering flaw. I reached out to my neighbor, Carol Mason. She was a retired nurse, sharp as a tack, and she'd been watching Patricia's behavior for months with the trained eye of someone who'd seen plenty of family dysfunction in her medical career. When I finally told her what was happening, her reaction was immediate and decisive. I knew something was wrong, she said, sitting in my garage workshop while I showed her the documentation I'd been gathering. Nobody treats family that way. The way she talks to you, the way she dismisses everything you say, I've seen this pattern before in elder abuse cases. Carol became my first ally. Then she introduced me to Charles Wilson, an estate attorney who specialized in exactly these kinds of situations. When I showed Charlie the evidence I'd been systematically collecting, the financial fraud, the identity theft, the recorded conversations about incompetency proceedings, his expression grew darker with each document. "Rick, this is criminal," he said, spreading the papers across his desk like electrical schematics. "We're talking federal crimes here. Wire fraud, identity theft across state lines, elder abuse, but more importantly, you have legal options right now that she doesn't even know exist." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Let Patricia continue exactly as she had been, but document everything systematically. Give her enough rope to hang herself while we built an ironclad case. Meanwhile, we'd prepare the legal groundwork to protect my assets and remove her from the house she didn't actually have any right to live in. The hardest part was watching Timothy. My son was trapped in that marriage, slowly being hollowed out by a woman who used love as a control mechanism, but I couldn't save him until he was ready to see the system failure for himself. That moment came sooner than I expected, and it came through his professional expertise. 3 weeks later, Timothy came to me in the garage. He looked terrible, pale, exhausted, like a man whose entire system was running on backup power. "Dad," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something technical. Our bank accounts, the numbers don't add up. No matter how much we both make, there's never anything left. Patricia says it's just the economy, inflation, normal financial pressure. But I've been running calculations, and the math doesn't work." That was the opening I'd been waiting for. My son, the software engineer, finally applying systematic analysis to his own life. "But what really bothers me," he continued, "is our investment accounts. The ones Patricia has been managing for years. I checked them yesterday for the first time in months. Dad, there's almost nothing there. Years of contributions, both our 401k rollovers, everything we've saved, it's all gone. I showed him everything then. The credit cards opened in my name. The loans Patricia had secured using my information. The money trail leading to accounts she controlled. I played him the recorded conversations where she discussed her plans to have me declared incompetent and seize control of my assets. Timothy's face went through a dozen expressions as he processed the data. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally something that looked like relief. Relief that he wasn't losing his mind, that his engineering instincts had been right all along about the system not functioning properly. "What do we do?" he asked, and for the first time in years he sounded like my son again instead of Patricia's trained assistant. "We take back control of our own system," I said. Together, Charlie Wilson had prepared all the legal documentation we needed. As co-owners of the property, Timothy and I had the right to determine who lived in our house. Patricia had no legal claim to anything. She'd never been on the deed, never contributed to the mortgage in any documented way, never even paid utilities in her own name. We served her with formal notice to vacate within 30 days. We also filed criminal charges for the identity theft and fraud, backed by months of carefully documented evidence that would make any prosecutor's case bulletproof. Patricia's reaction was everything I'd expected and more. She screamed, threatened, tried to gaslight Timothy one last time about his ungrateful father and family loyalty. But when faced with recorded evidence of her crimes, financial records that couldn't be explained away, and the cold legal reality that she had no right to the property, her house of cards collapsed completely. The woman who'd spent years manipulating others through emotional control suddenly found herself facing a system she couldn't manipulate. The legal system, backed by engineering quality documentation. She was gone within a week, taking only what she could prove was legitimately hers. The criminal case moved forward through proper channels, and Charlie assured us we'd recover most of the stolen money through asset forfeiture and restitution orders. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was watching my son remember who he was, seeing him stand up straight for the first time in years. We spent the following months repairing more than just the house. We rebuilt our relationship, based this time on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Timothy helped me convert the garage back into a proper workshop, and I moved my engineering equipment back into the main house where it belonged. We installed a memorial corner for Barbara in the living room, with fresh daisies every week and the retirement photo, professionally repaired and reframed. 6 months later, Charlie called with the final numbers. Patricia had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for wire fraud and identity theft. More importantly, we'd recovered nearly every dollar she'd stolen, plus penalties and interest. I never set out for revenge. I just wanted my dignity back, and to protect my family from someone who saw trust as weakness and love as something to exploit. In the end, Patricia destroyed herself. I just made sure the evidence was properly documented when she did it. Some people think getting older means becoming irrelevant, that experience doesn't matter in a world of new technology. But I learned something important that year. 35 years of systematic problem solving doesn't just disappear because you hit retirement age. Patricia thought she was smarter than a retired engineer. She found out that wisdom and patience are still the most powerful tools in any troubleshooter's arsenal. These days, I wake up in my own bed, in my own house, with my son's respect restored and my late wife's memory properly honored. My patents still generate royalty checks, my workshop hums with new projects, and Patricia is exactly where she belongs, paying for her crimes. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting the truth do its systematic work. Experience isn't something that expires when you retire, it's the foundation that everything else is built on. The people who think age makes you vulnerable forget that wisdom is just pattern recognition with 40 years of data behind it.